Get into the speakers we've brought along. We've got a bloke by the name of Mr. Don Close. He's at 30 brought here with by Rabobank. He's had 36 years livestock marketing experience and with various companies in America, and has been a feeder cattle buyer for Oklahoma City and Oma stockyards. Don's going to talk to us today about the state of affairs in the US, global beef markets, and what impact that'll have on Australia. Over to you. Thanks, Don.
Good morning. I'm absolutely honoured to be here. It has been a lifelong goal to tour your beautiful country and to see your cattle industry and say, I finally got the opportunity. When I was doing my prep work in getting ready for this presentation, it came to my attention that Paul Engler from Amarillo, Texas, Betty Jo Jiggett from Garden City area, and then last year Randy Block has spoken to this group over time. And I'm proud to say that each of the three of them are genuine friends of mine, and I hope that I can measure up to the quality of representation of our industry that they're capable of doing. It doesn't matter which of our markets for the past year and this coming year that you want to talk about. The center of conversation is the same. When's it going to rain? Where's it going to rain? How much is it going to rain? Is it going to get hot? And when's it going to rain again? And that clearly, from the conversations I've had and the observations I've had in the short period I've been here, we have a very close connection that that very same driver is the key in your market as well. This is the U.S. Drought Monitor map, and this is, while it has been extremely disgusting, we've gone through 3 years of persistent drought in the southern states, and specifically the Texas area, Texas, Oklahoma area, and New Mexico. This update as of March 12th is substantially better than what we had been just a matter of weeks ago. That if you look at the area there in our eastern corn belt, would be the Mississippi River, and the real severity of the drought on our row crop regions last year was in the eastern corn belt. So that red area over last summer extended over all of that whole area. I did a series of meetings just the week before I came down under, and I did a meeting in Springfield, Illinois, Evansville, Indiana, Lafayette, Indiana, and Springfield, Illinois. And that's all this area right here. And I've also done meetings with producers in Nebraska, Iowa, and I don't have to share with you that you get a vast difference of perspective of what our crop prospects are for the coming year and what our price model will likely be like given the region of the producers that you're talking with. Couple points to make here for those that aren't aware. You know, before Rabo, I was the market director with the Texas Cattle Feeders Association and was stationed in Amarillo, Texas. And if you look at where our U.S. fed beef production takes place, if you draw a flat line there across the Texas Panhandle, eastern New Mexico, eastern Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, back across Kansas, that's the region where the majority of our fed cattle are fed. One thing that needs to be pointed out is that if you draw a diagonal line across the states, the general perception is that with our big ranches and big cattle operations in the West, that the majority of our cow numbers would be in the western United States. And that's not the case. Actually, a larger portion of our cows come from this southeast quadrant than in the West. And that largely explains why the average cow herd in the U.S. isn't much more than 35 to 50 head, but it's comprised of a lot of these small producers. Now, why I bring that up and the encouragement, because as you can see, those weather conditions have so vastly improved, it does give us some optimism that we could see some recovery going forward. This is the orange bar there across the center of that screen is the U.S. corn yield, and it's really difficult to give any kind of overview of the U.S. cattle industry without talking about our corn production. I've learned from many of my discussions that it might be clear if I refer to it to you guys as maize, that to us it's number 2 yellow corn. But our average corn yield last year was 124 bushels an acre. That's right, and you can see just how precipitous that decline was from our historical. This red baseline is the bottom of our historical trend line, the blue's the top, and where we were last year. These gray bars across the way, that's the increase in plant populations that we've planted over time in order to continuously increase that yield. And we have some concerns that we've just about packed as many seeds or kernels in a row as we can. And if we're going to continue to see the increase in yield productivity that we've seen in the past, we're going to have to develop new technology and narrow up our rows, so get more rows per field because we've tapped out how many kernels we can get in a row. Early projections for our 2013-2014 corn crop that will be starting to be planted. Actually, the southern end of our crop's already in the ground, but the majority of our corn belt, they'll plant that crop mid to late April and finish up in early May. But early yield estimates for the crop are from the 124 bushels we had this last year is back to 154, 155 is where the majority of our trade analysts are currently at. A couple of weeks ago, USDA had their annual Outlook conference, and they came with a yield estimate of 164 bushels per acre, and that's based just absolutely off of historical trendline yields and seems incredibly optimistic. The last point that I'll make with this slide before I move on is that if you will go through, we've never had 2 severe drought years back to back, and we can, given the fact we've seen that recovery in subsoil moisture conditions in the eastern Corn Belt and the history of never having 2 failures in a row, gives us a growing optimism that we'll at least have a comparable or average crop this coming year. I'm going to use this slide to start making the transition from our feed supplies to our cattle market. And what this slide is the x-axis is the price of corn per bushel over an extended period of time, and the y-axis is our cost to gain. So it's the correlation between what corn price is per bushel and what our cost to gain is on a fed steer. And you can see we're currently working with cost to gains in excess of the 125 level. We've got, with the weather we've had over most of our feeding area over the last 3 to 4 weeks, as we get March and April cost to gain numbers and strength in corn price, that number is going to be something on top of $1.35. We're selling fat steers today, which is Thursday, at $1.24. And those are cattle that roughly cost close to $1.50 for a yearling weight steer, and our cost to gain something on top of $1.30, and selling them at $1.24. You can see just off the back of your hand that those aren't very positive economics. This picture I stuck in just kind of as a filler when I started out, but it's gotten a tremendous amount of interest as I've gone across the country. This is just as conventional a feed yard in the U.S. as you could draw up, and there's nothing really different than here. The only thing that gets some interest is in the middle of that mill is there's a boiler in the bottom of this, and there's a steam chest up in the mill of that elevator, and all of that corn will be steamed and heated before it runs through a roller mill. So majority of our feed is steamed flake corn. U.S. cattle inventory report released as of January 1 across the board was a disappointment. Wasn't a surprise. We knew with the additional liquidation that cow slaughter we'd seen throughout 2012 that pretty much where we stood. But all cattle and calves at 89 million. All cows and calved at 38.5 million, down 2%. Beef cows down 3%. The milk cow number was unchanged. All heifers 5 and over down 1. Okay, that could have been a touch better than expected. Really, the only positive number in that whole report was that beef replacement heifer number at 5.36 million that was up 2%. And where we drew encouragement from that was the economic signal from the cattle feeders and backgrounders to the cow-calf sector has been sent, and they have the desire to recover and expand. They've received the signal that as soon as we get any cooperation from Mother Nature, we think we could see some pretty substantial reductions in our cow slaughter as we retain cows, and see a very substantial reduction in the number of heifers being placed on feed as we see more and more heifers go back to the country. The rest of this, steers 5 and over were unchanged, calves under 5 down 2, and our 2012 calf crop down 3%. To give you a perspective of the long-range impact, that January 1 cattle inventory report, we have the lowest total cattle numbers in the U.S. as of January 1 that we have had in over 60 years. We've substantially reduced the total cattle inventory, and going to take a very concentrated, and while we talk about this change and where I'll lead into some potential opportunities for this audience, is it's going to be a long, hard pull before we ever see cattle numbers recover to anything like what we've seen in years past. This picture was taken 2 weeks ago Monday in Pampa, Texas. And Pampa, Texas is about 30 miles northeast of Amarillo. And my son, actually, this was in the newspaper, but my son sent this picture to me. They had 19 inches of snow in Amarillo that Monday morning. And while that snow was falling, they had 40 to 50 mile an hour straight winds and had gusts up to 70 miles an hour. And with that kind of wind and that much snow, that snow packed so hard that those cattle were walking right over the top of the fences. This group made it into town to have them a tall black, and we're standing at the corner of 1st and Main. Now, other than the amusement factor of this slide, I would say if we get to about 3:30, 4 o'clock this afternoon and you step outside this building and it feels a little warm, think about that picture and you'll automatically be cooler. Our cattle on feed numbers, and this report, our March report, will be released tomorrow. So Friday in the U.S., tomorrow we'll get our March report. But in February, our cattle on feed supply was at 94%, down 6%. Our placements in January were actually up 2%, but that was the first out of the previous 6 months we had seen consecutive month-over-month decline in placements as supplies were tight, weather conditions were less than ideal, and the economics simply didn't work. Now, why the importance of that is that if you simply take those cattle entered into the feed yard as placements, advance them 150 to 160 days, when those cattle will be coming back out of the feed yard will be from March through July of this year. That is absolutely our peak usage period. That as our weather starts to improve March and April, early May, everybody pulls out their Weber grill, that we were talking about having Weber grills last night, and we start off our grilling season that will last typically till early July, past our 4th of July holiday, and then the weather gets pretty hot and consumption slows down. But besides that ideal stretch of weather and everybody ready to get outside after being bottled up all winter, we have 3 primary holidays over that same time window. We have Easter, Mother's Day, and Father's Day. And our heaviest beef consumption weekend of the year in the U.S. is Mother's Day. And the reason is that that's the weekend where dads take over the kitchen and cook, and they cook what they want to eat. Marketings in January up 6%. That's a little bit misleading, and because there was one additional day in January this year over last year. So if you put that on a day-to-day basis, it was up like 2%. The big thing of this is just the 6% reduction in total on feed numbers and the acknowledgement that the previous 6 months placements were all lower, and expectations in the report tomorrow that placements will be back down 15 to 20%. So we're still reducing the number of cattle we have on feed. Our fed slaughter for the year to date has been down about 2%, and part of that is, just available supplies. And really, given where we're at, it's been a quite aggressive pace. It's just that with cattle losing the money they are, corn price as high as it is, the guys are looking to push cattle through the system just as quickly as they can. Our weekly carcass weights are starting to come back in line with a year ago. But we're continuously asked the question, if numbers are down so hard, how do you continuously produce more, as much or more total beef production? There's the answer right there. We just simply continue to make them bigger. And we make them bigger at the cow level, we make them bigger at the ranch level, and we make them bigger in the feed yard. And we're continuing. I started buying fat cattle in Omaha in probably 1982, 1983, and I can recall conversations at that time that these cattle are too doggone big, we can't make them any bigger, genetically it's just impossible. Our average slaughter weight on steers at that time would have been something about between 1,150 and 1,200 pounds. Our live weight today is on top of 1,330. And there's absolutely no indications of seeing the size of that animal slow down at all. We get a lot of discussion that the cut sizes are simply too big for the plate. And when we talk about middle meats and our steak cuts, that's absolutely true. But that rib and loin only represents 18% of that total carcass, and as we're continuously pushed to get as total edible pounds of beef to the consumer, the chuck and round and those flat meats is where that real tonnage comes from. Beef production, in spite of the 2% decline in our slaughter, given that increase in carcass weights that I've just talked through, our actual beef production is down right at unchanged for the year, but you can see from this slide that decline and that reduction in total of available fed cattle supplies that I've already talked about. Our slaughter and subsequently our beef production will trail radically below last year in our historical averages here, certainly for the first half of the year, if not beyond. This is absolutely a simple model. It takes our actual price of feeder cattle to the feed yard, takes the actual placement weight, the actual cost of gain, and against the finished weight and sales price 180 days out. And you can see with this, now there is no contribution in this model for management and control of feed grain prices, whether they're contracting, hedging, or whatever, and there's no risk management on the cattle. So there could be some differences to individual operations, that this is just the simplest economic model. But we have had the longest sustained period of $150 to $200 head losses that we've ever had. And we're simply getting to that point that how much longer can we go? There's a very old rule and adage in the U.S. cattle feeding that cattle feeders will lose money for 2.5 turns. And at that point, either they and their lender will decide they need to make some adjustments. And we're to that 2.5 turn point right now. And so, and I'll show it, and it's having a radical impact on our feeder cattle prices. There's one last point with this slide. You can see these two red horizontal lines. The one at roughly $50 and the second one at about $85. Those are the feed yard margins for a yearling at $50 and feed yard margins for a calf at $85. A feed yard is just like a motel. They sell room, they sell meals, and they put a margin on both of those saleable products. And the red line is the feed yard margins on a yearling, and the second one is the feed yard margins on a calf. But you can see that the frequency in time that when the losses got to eroded past those yard margins, they stopped. And this time we've gone beyond it. But the thing is, their actual losses, because of the contribution of margin from the yard, is carrying part of the losses against the cattle. And so that the net losses aren't quite as bad as just if someone, an outside individual, was paying room rent and meal cost across the board. All right. World trade. We've talked about the tight supplies in the U.S., and we know where that stands. Canada has been, ever since their BSE event in 2003, their beef cattle industry has just been disassembled. And while they're seeing some very nominal recovery and expansion, it's still very flat. Mexico imported 1.45 million feeder cattle into the United States in 2011, largely driven by the drought. Excuse me. We got to looking at how many U.S. cattle on feed in the U.S. were Mexican origin for 2012. And 10% of the U.S. cattle on feed supply were Spanish-speaking cattle from Mexico. If you look at the states of Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, so the border states that would be the most logical transportation reception for those cattle, 27% of the cattle in those 5 states would be Mexican cattle. And we simply looked at Mexico has overshipped because of forced liquidation but due to weather. And there's a very identifiable pattern with shipments of Mexican cattle to the U.S. that largely with weather, but about every 5th to 6th year they will overship supplies, and to a point that it takes 3 to 5 years for them to rebuild populations enough to resume exports to the States. So that's where Mexico is. It'll be several years before they recover. Rabobank, at least Rabobank US, and a lot of the Rabobank team's perception is that Europe is in the process of regulating themselves out of food sufficiency, and that could very well be a net importer of food. And I think there's a couple of lessons for both the U.S., Australia, and that one is A, don't follow that lead, and the other is it could be some very keen export opportunities for both of our countries for total edible proteins. Russia is currently has a hold on exports of beef products from the U.S. because of it's labeled because of ractopamine, but it has to do with the political rift between the two countries. One interesting part with Russia is while they're not taking any of our beef products right now, U.S. shipped roughly 40,000 head of the best black Angus heifers you ever laid eyes on to Russia. Our largest world export customer for live cattle in 2012 was Russia, with 40,000 Angus heifers. The very heifers we so desperately need to be rebuilding our own numbers. So I wonder about the logic on that one. Australia, and you guys know your market better than I do, but 2 to 4 years, depending upon the region, of very good weather, good growth in the industry. Now starting to see some stress because of some weather issues, and will probably be forced into some liquidation. Very similar with New Zealand. The one thing that we are seeing in the U.S. and we're very envious of with is the fact that Australia is getting front door trade into China. and the fact we're still working with the gray market with Hong Kong, Vietnam, and Taiwan, and having to say backdoor that product into China. But the largest net importer of beef in the world in 2012 was India, and the processing of water buffalo. You know, if you take everything that I've known of India, the country of India, the religious practices, the politics, and you tell me that they're the world's largest beef exporter, just defies logic. But it's true, and that will continue to be the case for a while. At the end of the day, the only area in the world that's really seeing growth in total beef production, Brazil and Argentina. And they're going to be a very keen competitor for a very long time. You know, the two game changers, if you say, okay, you take everything on this world trade, what are the two 900-pound gorillas that both the U.S. and Australia will have to deal with in the years ahead? 1.3 billion people divided by any number is still a very big number. And they're going to rule the roost. And certainly from the politics that I grew up with, and even the politics that you grew up with, and the world dynamics, we got to get used to it. The other one is with the growing production base in Brazil, and the leadership role that they're trying to take worldwide, it's going to be very substantial. You can see from this slide, I went through all the slides showing the reduction in available beef supplies in the U.S. and just I didn't sum it up, but in the U.S. we're in a catch-22 that if weather conditions don't improve, we'll continue to liquidate numbers. If it does rain and conditions do improve, we're going to see such an extensive retention of cows and heifers that our beef production is going to decline. So it doesn't matter if it rains or doesn't rain, our beef production numbers are going to go down. And we're going to be dependent on export trade or import trade to supply our needs. This slide, just long-term history, you can see that our import relationships, clearly Australia is hands down our largest importer. That is followed up by Canada. There's New Zealand. And then if you get down to Argentina and Uruguay, all the others. The one interesting point in this one is this red line, and that is imports of beef from Mexico. And there's two drivers there. One is they're really working hard at developing a beef processing industry in central Mexico. But the second is that given the growth in the Hispanic population in the U.S., those Hispanic Mexican immigrants, they still like their own product, and they cut beef a little bit different than we do. I didn't have a slide prepared for it, but I've had a lot of discussion and a lot as I prepped for this meeting. About a year ago, I guess, there was some representatives from the Chicago Mercantile Exchange in Australia, and there was some discussions at the time of the Merc opening a futures contracts on 50% CL and 90% CL trimmings. And we've had a fair amount of discussion in the States about that, but we haven't seen much progress. But I want to say this, if I were to convey my personal perspective, I think given the likelihood of expanded world trade, and specifically on beef trimmings in the future, it would be a very good contract, and it's a very good interrelated contract with our existing live cattle futures. I know that I communicated with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange a couple of weeks ago in preparing to come down here and ask them, this discussion's going on, where does this sit? And they said, well, it's under discussion, and no, there's really, yes, it's progressing, but I don't have any announcement for you. And then I checked back with them just immediately before I came. We've got some issues with our existing live cattle contract underway that we're trying to get some weight changes. We're trying to get heifers added to the delivery mix. And so that and those changes were advocated by our National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And so those changes to our live cattle contract have suddenly taken precedence over launching the trimmings contracts. I think I'm going to try to leave that with, I'm not here to sell you on, while I personally believe it's a good thing. And I think it would create a tremendous risk management for us in the states and for your processors and even you as producers as well. I'm not going to come here as a champion for the CME, but I would encourage you to at least be aware that these development contracts are in play and to at least be informed about what they are so that you can form your opinion on whether they should be developed or not. That is a very brief overview of our production in the States and given a very topographical view of where the U.S. sees export trade. When the program was put together, that was listed as questions, and while I would be happy to take any,